And by studying those equations, you are able to judge what the future holds in store for us.
In theory. But there are difficulties.
Oh? What are they?
To begin with, no human mind has created those equations directly. We have merely spent decades programming more powerful computers. It all depends on the validity of the programming.
They could all be wrong, then.
They could be.
Amaral rubbed his eyes, and Dors could not help thinking how old and tired he seemed to have grown. He was younger than Harry by nearly a dozen years, but he seemed much older. How many people have access to these prime radiants?
Every mathematician in the project has access, but not at will. There have to be applications and time allotted.
Is there any plan for constructing additional prime radiants?
Amaral thrust out his lips. Yes and no. It would be very helpful if we had a third, but someone would have to be in charge of it. I have suggested to Harry that Tamwile Elar have a third prime radiant. His achaotic equations and the electro-clarifier he thought up make him clearly the third man in the project after Harry and myself. Harry hesitates, however.
Why? Do you know?
If Elar gets one, he is openly recognized as the third man, over the head of other more senior mathematicians. There might be some political difficulty, so to speak. I think that we can't waste time in worrying about internal politics, but Harry, well, you know Harry.
Yes, I know Harry. Suppose I tell you that Lynn has seen the prime radiant.
Lynn?
Colonel Lynn of the Junta, General Tenar's lackey.
I doubt that very much, Dors.
He has spoken of spiraling equations, and I have just seen them produced by the prime radiant. I can't help but think he's been here and seen it working.
Amaral shook his head. I can't imagine anyone bringing a member of the Junta into Harry's office, or mine.
Well, now, you talked about internal politics a while ago. I suppose in a project such as this there are little feuds going on all the time, frictions, quarrels.
Oh, yes. Poor Harry talks to me about it every once in a while. He has to deal with them in one way or another.
Is there anything in the frictional problems within the project that threaten him? I mean, with physical harm?
Harm? Harry? Of course not. How can you suggest such a thing?
Might there not be some who resent Harry, perhaps simply because he has run the project for so long a time?
I never heard anyone say such a thing about Harry.
Dors seemed dissatisfied. I doubt that anyone would say such things in your hearing, of course. Do you think Harry is wearing out? I'm not referring to his mental brilliance. I'm referring to his physical capacities.
Amaral looked astonished. I never gave it any thought.
He may be, just the same. I think he has the impulse now and then to give up his post and hand the task over to some younger man.
What? That's ridiculous. Impossible.
Be reasonable, Hugo. Harry is exhausted. What if he does decide to retire? What would become of the project? Amaral's eyes narrowed.
Are you joking, Dors?
No. I'm just trying to look into the future.
Surely, if Harry retires, I succeed to the post. I'm amazed you don't take my succession for granted, Dors. Look here, Dors. Did you come here to break the news that Harry intends to ease me out?
Dors said, Certainly not. How could you think that of Harry? Have you ever known him to turn on a friend?
Very well, then. Let's drop the subject. Really, Dors, if you don't mind, there are things I must do.
Abruptly he turned away from her and bent over his work once more. Thank you, Hugo, for being so helpful, and for giving me so much of your time. Dors left, frowning. Amaral stared after her. He felt vaguely troubled, but then returned to his work and let other matters drift away. Dors eyed the woman in the small electroclarification laboratory carefully. A look of intelligence shone in her dark brown eyes as she worked. The glowing nameplate on her desk said, Cinda Monet. She turned to Dors at last and said, "My apologies, Dr. Venable, but there are some procedures that can't be interrupted even for the wife of the director." "I would have been disappointed in you if you had neglected the procedure on my behalf. I have been told some excellent things about you." "That's always nice to hear. Who's been praising me?" "Quite a few," said Dors. "I gather that you are one of the most prominent non-mathematicians in the project. My understanding is that you have been responsible for the development of a device important to the use of the prime radiant. It makes it possible to cram much more information into the prime radiant." Monet broke into a radiant smile. "Do you know about that?" "Yes, the electro-clarifier. After that was developed, Professor Selden established this small laboratory and put me in charge." "I'm amazed that such an important advance did not bring you up into the higher echelons of the project." Monet looked a trifle embarrassed. "I don't want to take all the credit. Actually, my work was only that of a technician, a very skilled and creative technician, I like to think, but there you are." "And who worked with you?" "Temwile Elar. He worked out the theory, and I designed and built the actual instrument." "Does that mean he took the credit, Dr. Monet?" "Oh, no. He gave me full credit for my share of the work. In fact, it was his idea to call the device by our names, both our names. But he couldn't." "Why not?" "Well, that's Professor Selden's rule, you know. All devices and equations are to be given functional names and not personal ones, to avoid resentment. So the device is just called the electro-clarifier. When we're working together, however, he gives the device our names, and I tell you, Dr. Venable, it sounds grand. Perhaps someday all the project personnel will use the personal name." "I hope so." "I hope so, too. You make Elar sound like a very decent individual." He is, said Monet earnestly. "He is a delight to work for. Right now I'm working on a new version for the device, which is more powerful and which I don't quite understand. I mean, what it's to be used for. However, he's directing me there." "And are you making progress?" "Indeed. In fact, I've given Dr. Elar a prototype, which he plans to test. If it works out, we can proceed further." "It sounds good," agreed Dors. "What do you think would happen if Professor Selden were to resign as director of the project? If he were to retire?" Monet looked surprised. "Is the professor planning to retire?" "Not that I know of. I'm presenting you with a hypothetical case. Suppose he retires. Who do you think would be the natural successor? I think, from what you have said, that you would favor Professor Elar as the new director." Monet hesitated for a split second and said, "Yes, I would. He's far and away the most brilliant of the new people, and I think he could run the project in the best possible way. Still, he's rather young. There are a considerable number of old fossils, well, you know what I mean, who would resent being passed over by a young squirt." "Is there any old fossil you think of in particular?" "Well, there's Dr. Amaral. He's the heir apparent." "Yes, I see what you mean." Dors rose. "Well, thank you so much for your help. I'll let you return to your work now." She left, thinking about the electro-clarifier and about Amaral. Rach opened the door to his apartment. "Come in, Mom. The coast is clear. I've sent Manella and Wanda off somewhere." "Thanks." Dors headed for the nearest chair, and for a while she simply sat there, looking as if the weight of the empire were on her shoulders. Rach waited, and then said, "Unburden yourself, Mom. Tell me what's on your mind. From the beginning." "It starts with Wanda's dream." "Wanda's dream? Mom!" "I don't think it was a dream, Rach. I think what she thought was a dream were two real people." "That's a wild guess on your part." "Just suppose it is true. The one phrase that remained with her was lemonade death. Why should she dream that? It's much more likely that she heard that and distorted the words she heard. In which case, what were the undistorted words?" "I can't tell you." Rach was incredulous. "You think this is just my sick invention. Still, if I happen to be right, I might be at the start of unraveling a conspiracy against Harry, right here in the project.
You'll never make Dad believe there's any conspiracy whatsoever. For that matter, you'll never make me believe that. Rach walked hastily across the room and back again. And you've been trying to nose out this so-called conspiracy, have you? Doris nodded. And you failed. Doris nodded. Doesn't it occur to you that you failed because there is no conspiracy, Mom? Doris shook her head. I failed so far, but that doesn't shake my belief that one exists. There is one phrase that I think can be distorted into lemonade. That's layman-aided. Layman-aided? What's that? Layman-aided. 2 words. A layman is what the mathematicians at the project call non-mathematicians. Well, suppose someone spoke of layman-aided death. Might that not have sounded to Wanda like lemonade death, considering that she had never heard the phrase layman-aided? But she was extraordinarily fond of lemonade. Are you trying to tell me that there were people in Dad's private office of all places? How many people, by the way? Wanda, in describing her dream, says 2. My own feeling is that one of the 2 was none other than Colonel Hender Lynn of the Junta, and that he was being shown the prime radiant, and that there must have been a discussion involving the elimination of Harry. You're getting wilder and wilder, Mom. In that case, if there was mention of laymen during this supposed discussion, then one of the people, presumably the one that wasn't Lynn, must have been a mathematician. It would seem to be so. That seems utterly impossible. But even if it were true, which mathematician do you suppose might be in question? There are at least 50 in the project. I've questioned a few, and some laymen too, for that matter, but I have uncovered no leads. In short, no one you have interviewed has given you any lead on any dangerous conspiracy. No, I'm not surprised. They haven't done so because I know your because, Rach. Do you suppose people are going to break down and give away conspiracies under mild questioning? Then, with a sudden change in the intonation of her voice, she said, Rach, have you talked to Hugo Amaral lately? No, not recently. He's not one of your sociable creatures, you know. If you pulled the psychohistory out of him, he'd collapse into a little pile of dry skin. Doris made a face. I've talked to him, and he seems to me to be a little withdrawn. I don't mean just tired. It's almost as though he's not aware of the world. Yes, that's Hugo. Is he getting worse lately? Rach thought a while. He might be. He's getting older, you know. We all are. Except you, Mom. Would you say that Hugo had crossed the line and become a little unstable, Rach? Hugo? He has nothing to be unstable about. Just leave him at his psychohistory and he'll mumble quietly to himself for the rest of his life. I don't think so. There is something that interests him, and very strongly, too. Hugo is determined, absolutely determined, to be your father's successor. He seemed to me to be not quite normal about it. He thought I was coming to him to break the news that Harry had shoved him aside in favor of someone else. Mom, are you getting ready to tell me that it might be Hugo who's at the heart of this conspiracy you're speaking of? That he wants to get rid of Dad and take over? Is that entirely impossible? Yes, it is, Mom, entirely. If there's anything wrong with Hugo, it's overwork and nothing else. Staring at all those equations, or whatever they are, all day and half the night would drive anyone crazy. Doris rose to her feet with a jerk. You're right. Rach was startled. What's the matter? What you've said. It's given me an entirely new idea. A crucial one, I think. Turning, without another word, she left. Doris Venabili said to Harry Seldon, You've spent 4 days at the Galactic Library, and again you've managed to go without me. Husband and wife stared at each other's image on their holoscreens. Harry had just returned to the Imperial sector from a research trip. He was calling Doris from his project office. I did not go alone, Doris. I had a number of people with me, and the Galactic Library, of all places, is safe for scholars. I am going to have to be at the library more and more often, I think, as time goes on.
And you're going to continue to do it without telling me.
Doris, I can't live according to these death-filled views of yours, nor do I want you running after me and upsetting the librarians. They're not the junta.
Doris, looking grim, changed the subject. Do you know that I talked to Hugo recently?
I'm glad you did. He needs contact with the outside world.
He's not the Hugo we've had with us all these years. He's become vague, distant, and, oddly enough, passionate on only one point, as nearly as I can tell. His determination to succeed you on your retirement.
Well, that would be natural if he survives me.
Don't you expect him to survive you?
Well, he's 11 years younger than I am, but the vicissitudes of circumstance.
What you really mean is that you recognize that Hugo is in a bad way. He looks and acts older than you do, and that seems to be a rather recent development. Is he ill?
Physically, I don't think so. I'll admit, though, that he seems drained. I've tried to persuade him to take a vacation.
Doris shook her head impatiently. And, of course, he won't.
So what can we do? Said Selden.
Doris said, We can think a little. Hugo worked for a quarter of a century on the project and seemed to maintain his strength without any trouble at all. And now, suddenly, he has weakened. It can't be age. He's not yet 50.
Are you suggesting something?
Yes. How long have you and Hugo been using this electro-clarifier thing on your prime radiance?
About 2 years, maybe a little more.
I presume that the electro-clarifier is used by anyone who uses the prime radiant.
That's right.
Which means Hugo and you, mostly.
Yes.
And Hugo more than you.
Yes, I unfortunately have to spend much of my time on administrative duties.
And what effect does the electro-clarifier have on the human body?
Selden looked surprised. None of any significance that I am aware of.
In that case, explain something to me, Harry. The electro-clarifier has been in operation for over 2 years, and in that time you've grown measurably more tired, crotchety, and a little out of touch. Why is that?
I'm getting older, Doris.
Nonsense. You're using your age as a crutch and a defense, and I want you to stop it. Hugo, though he's younger, has been exposed to the electro-clarifier more than you have, and as a result, he is more tired, more crotchety, and, in my opinion, a great deal less in touch than you are. Don't you see anything significant in this?
Age and overwork, that's significant.
No, it's the electro-clarifier. It's having a long-term effect on the two of you.
After a pause, Selden said, I can't disprove that, Doris, but I don't see how it's possible. The electro-clarifier is a device that produces an unusual electronic field, but it's still only a field of the type to which human beings are constantly exposed. It can't do any unusual harm. In any case, we can't give up its use. There's no way of continuing the progress of the project without it.
Now, Harry, I must ask something of you, and you must cooperate with me on this. Go nowhere outside the project without telling me, and do nothing out of the ordinary without telling me. Do you understand?
Doris, how can I agree to this? You're trying to put me into a straitjacket.
It's just for a while, a few days, a week.
What's going to happen in a few days or a week?
Trust me, I will clear up everything. Harry Selden knocked gently on Hugo Amaril's door. Hugo looked up.
Harry, how nice of you to drop in. I should do it more often. In the old days we were together all the time. Have you heard the news?
What news?
The junta is going to set up a poll tax.
The shouting will start the instant the announcement is out.
The riots will begin. Are you sure of it?
Amaral put his prime radiant into action and expanded the appropriate section.
See for yourself, Harry. If it doesn't happen, it means that everything we've worked out in psychohistory is wrong, and I refuse to believe that.
I'll try to have courage, Selden smiled. How do you feel lately, Hugo? Well enough. And how are you, by the way? I've heard rumors that you're thinking of resigning. If you do resign, Harry, what are your plans for the future? Well, you'll take over. What other plans can I possibly have? And Amaral smiled. In a small conference room in the main building, Tamwile Elar listened to Dors Venable with a gathering look of confusion and anger on his face. Finally he burst out, "Impossible!" He rubbed his chin, then went on cautiously, "I don't mean to offend you, Dr. Venable. There's no way in which anyone can think that there are, in this psychohistory project, any feelings so deadly as to justify your suspicions. I would certainly know if there were, and I assure you there are not. Don't think it." "I do think it," said Dors stubbornly, "and I can find evidence for it. I don't know how to say this without offense, Dr. Venable, but if a person is ingenious and intent enough on proving something, he or she can find all the evidence he or she wants, or at least something he or she believes is evidence." Dors paused and considered Elar's statement. "You're right. I can build a case against you, for instance." Elar's eyes widened in total astonishment. "Against me? I would like to hear what case you can possibly have against me." "Very well, you shall. The birthday party was your idea, wasn't it?" "I thought of it, yes. But I'm sure others did too. With the maestro moaning about his advancing years, it seemed a natural way of cheering him up." "I'm sure others may have thought of it, but it was you who actually pressed the issue and got my daughter-in-law fired up about it. She took over the details, and you persuaded her that it was possible to put together a really large celebration. Isn't that so?" "I don't know if I had any influence on her, but even if I did, what's wrong with that?" "In itself, nothing. But in setting up so large and widespread and prolonged a celebration, were we not advertising to the rather unstable and suspicious men of the junta that Harry was too popular and might be a danger to them?" "No one could possibly believe such a thing was in my mind." "I am merely pointing out the possibility. You went on to talk to Dr. Selden about his forthcoming meeting with the General and urged him, rather pressingly, to let you take his place. The result was, of course, that Dr. Selden insisted somewhat vehemently on seeing the General himself, which one can argue was precisely what you wanted him to do. And then it was you, wasn't it, who suggested that a group of us go to the Dome's Edge Hotel?" "Yes, and I remember you saying it was a good idea." "Might it not have been suggested in order to make the junta uneasy, as yet another example of Harry's popularity? And might it not have been arranged to tempt me into invading the palace grounds, thus turning the junta even further against Harry? But why, Dr. Venable, why would I be doing this?" "One might say it was to get rid of Dr. Selden and to succeed him as director of the project." "How can you possibly think this of me? I can't believe you are serious." "Let's turn to something else. You were in a position to use the empty rooms for private conversations, and you may have been there with a member of the junta. That is not even worth a denial. But you were overheard. A little girl wandered into the room, curled up in a chair, out of sight, and overheard your conversation." Elar frowned. "What did she hear?" "Two men talking about death. She was only a child, and could not repeat anything in detail, but 2 words did impress her, and they were lemonade death." "What can lemonade death mean? And what would it have to do with me?" "My first thought was to take it literally. Then I realized the girl had heard something else, which her imperfect command of the language and her love of the beverage had perverted into lemonade." "And have you invented a distortion?" Elar snorted. "It did seem to me for a while that what she might have heard was layman-aided death." "What does that mean?" An assassination carried through by laymen, by non-mathematicians. Doris stopped and frowned. Her hand clutched her chest. Elar said with sudden concern, "Something wrong, Dr. Van Obely?" "No." Doris shook herself. For a few moments she said nothing further, and Elar cleared his throat. "Your comments, Dr. Van Obely, are growing steadily more ridiculous, and, well, I don't care if I do offend you, but I have grown tired of them. Shall we put an end to this?" "We are almost at an end, Dr. Elar. You are, in part, responsible for the development of the electroclarifier, aren't you?" Elar seemed to stand straighter as he said with a touch of pride, "Entirely responsible." "Surely not entirely. I understand it was designed by Cinda Monet." "A designer. She followed my instructions." "A layman. The electroclarifier is a layman-aided device." "I don't think I want to hear that phrase again. Once more, shall we put an end to this?" Doris forged on as if she hadn't heard his request. "Though you give her no credit now, you gave Cinda credit to her face, to keep her working eagerly, I suppose. She said you gave her credit, and she was very grateful because of it. She said you even called the device by her name and yours, though that's not the official name." "Of course not. It's the electroclarifier." "And she said she was designing improvements, intensifiers, and so on, and that you had the prototype of an advanced version of the new device for testing." "What has all this to do with anything?" "Since Dr. Selden and Dr. Amaral have been working with the electroclarifier, both have in some ways deteriorated. Hugo, who works with it more, has suffered more." "The electroclarifier can in no way do that kind of damage." Doris put her hand to her forehead and momentarily winced. "And now you have a more intense electroclarifier that might do more damage, that might kill quickly rather than slowly." "Absolute nonsense." "Now consider the name of the device, a name which, according to the woman who designed it, you are the only one to use. I presume you called it the Elar Monet clarifier." "I don't ever recall using that phrase." "Surely you did, and the new intensified Elar Monet clarifier could be used to kill with no blame to be attached to anyone, just a sad accident through a new and untried device. It would be the Elar Monet death, and a little girl heard it as lemonade death." Dora's hand groped to her side. "You are not well, Dr. Van Obely." "I am perfectly well. Am I not correct?" "Look, it doesn't matter what you can twist into lemonade. Bring me into court or before a scientific investigating board and let experts, as many as you like, check the effect of the electroclarifier, even the new intensified one, on human beings. They will find it has no measurable effect." "I don't believe that." Dora's hands were now at her forehead, and her eyes were closed. She swayed slightly. Elar said, "It is clear that you are not well, Dr. Van Obely. Perhaps that means it is my turn to talk." "May I?" Dora's eyes opened, and she simply stared. "I'll take your silence for consent, Doctor. Of what use would it be for me to try to get rid of Dr. Selden and Dr. Amaral in order to take my place as director? You would prevent any attempt I make at assassination, as you now think you are doing. In the unlikely case that I succeeded in such a project and was rid of the two great men, you would tear me to pieces afterward. You're a very unusual woman, strong and fast beyond belief. And while you are alive, the maestro is safe." "Yes," Doris glowered. "I told this to the men of the junta. Why shouldn't they consult me on matters involving the project? It was difficult for them to believe what I told them about you, until you made your foray into the palace grounds. That convinced them, you could be sure, and they agreed with my plan." "Aha! Now we come to it. I told you the electroclarifier cannot harm human beings. Amaral and your precious Harry are just getting old. They are fine, perfectly human. The electromagnetic field has no effect on organic materials. Of course, it may have adverse effects on sensitive electromagnetic machinery, and if we could imagine a human being built of metal and electronics, it might have an effect on it. Legends tell us of such artificial human beings, robots. If there were such a thing as a robot, one would imagine it would be stronger and faster by far than an ordinary human being, that it would have properties, in fact, resembling those you have, Dr. Venabile. And such a robot could, indeed, be destroyed by an intense electroclarifier, such as the one that I have here, one that has been operating at low energy since we began our conversation. That is why you are feeling ill, Dr. Venabile, for the first time in your existence, I'm sure. Doors merely stared at the man. Slowly, she sank into a chair. Elar smiled and went on. Of course, with you taken care of, there will be no problem with the maestro and with Amaral. The maestro, in fact, may fade out at once and resign in grief, while Amaral is merely a child in his mind. In all likelihood, neither will have to be killed. How does it feel, Dr. Venabile, to be unmasked after all these years? I must admit, you are very good at concealing your true nature. Say goodbye, Dr. Venabile. All I have to do now is turn the device to full power, and you will be history. Doors rose slowly from her seat, mumbling, I may be better shielded than you think. Then, with a grunt, she threw herself at Elar. Elar, his eyes widening, shrieked and reeled back. Then Doors was on him, her hand flashing. Its side struck Elar's neck, smashing the vertebrae and shattering the nerve cord. He fell dead on the floor. Doors straightened with an effort and staggered toward the door. She had to find Harry. Harry Selden rose from his seat in horror. Doors, her face twisted, her body canted, was staggering as though she were drunk. Doors! What's happened? What's wrong? He ran to her, grasped her around the waist, even as her body collapsed in his arms. He lifted her and placed her on the couch. What happened? She told him, gasping, her voice breaking now and then, while he cradled her head and tried to force himself to believe what was happening. Elar is dead. I killed a human being. First time. Makes it worse. How badly are you damaged, Doors? Badly. Elar turned on his device full when rushed him. You can be readjusted. How? There's no one on Trantor who knows how. I need Daniil. Daniil, Demerzel. Somehow, deep inside, Harry had always known. His friend, a robot, had provided him with a protector, a robot. And Harry had fallen in love with his protector. It made sense now. All the nagging doubts and questions could be answered. Somehow, it didn't matter one bit. All that mattered was Doors. We can't let this happen. It must. Doors' eyes fluttered open and looked at Selden. Who will protect you now? Selden couldn't see her clearly. There was something wrong with his eyes. Don't worry about me, Doors. It's you. No, you, Harry. Tell Manella. I forgive her now. Explain to Wanda. You and Rach take care of each other. No. Selden rocked back and forth. Hang on, Doors. Please, my love. Doors' head shook feebly, and she smiled even more feebly. Goodbye, Harry, my love. Remember always all you did for me. I did nothing for you. You loved me, and your love made me human. Her eyes remained open, but Doors had ceased functioning. Hugo Amaral came storming into Selden's office.
Harry, the riots are beginning, sooner and harder than And then he stared at Selden and Dawes and whispered, "What happened?" Selden looked up at him in agony. "Riots. What do I care about riots now? What do I care about anything now?" Wanda Selden, from an entry in the Encyclopedia Galactica. In the waning years of Harry Selden's life, he grew most attached to, some say dependent upon, his granddaughter, Wanda. Orphaned in her teens, Wanda Selden devoted herself to her grandfather's psychohistory project, filling the vacancy left by Hugo Amaral. The content of Wanda Selden's work remains largely a mystery, for it was conducted in virtually total isolation. The only individuals allowed access to Wanda Selden's research were Harry himself and a young man named Stettin Palver, whose descendant Preem would 400 years later contribute to the rebirth of Trantor. Although the full extent of Wanda Selden's contribution to the Foundation is unknown, it was undoubtedly of the greatest magnitude. Harry Selden walked into the Galactic Library, limping a little, as he did more and more often these days, and made for the banks of skitters, the little vehicles that slid their way along the interminable corridors of the complex. He was held up, however, by the sight of 3 men seated at one of the galactography alcoves, with a galactograph showing the galaxy in full 3-dimensional representation. From where Selden stood, he could see that the border province of Anacreon was marked off in glowing red. Anacreon was not remarkable for either wealth or culture, but was remarkable for its distance from Trantor, 10,000 parsecs away. Selden, acting on impulse, took a seat at a computer console near the 3 and set up a random search. Some instinct told him that such an intense interest in Anacreon must be political in nature. His eyes remained on his screen, but Selden's ears were open for the discussion near him. One of the men, Selden thought of him as Hook-Nose, for obvious reasons, said in a low, urgent voice, "Let it go. It's costing us a mint to try and hold on, and even if we do, it will only be while they're there. They can't stay there forever, and as soon as they leave, the situation will revert to what it was." Selden knew what they were talking about. The news had come over Trantor Vision only 3 days before that the Imperial government had decided on a show of force to bring the obstreperous governor of Anacreon into line. Selden's own psychohistorical analysis had shown him that it was a useless procedure. Selden smiled slightly and grimly at hearing Hook-Nose say what he himself had said, and the young man said it without the benefit of any knowledge of psychohistory. The second man, whom Selden had labeled Baldy for even more obvious reasons, said, "If Anacreon goes, the other border provinces will go. The Empire will break up."
"So what?" whispered Hook-Nose fiercely. "The Empire can't run itself effectively any more anyway. It's too big. Let the border go and take care of itself if it can. The inner worlds will be all the stronger and better off. The border doesn't have to be ours politically. It will still be ours economically."
And now the third man, Red Cheeks, said, "I wish you were right, but that's not the way it's going to work. If the border provinces establish their independence, the first thing each will do will be to try to increase its power. There'll be war and conflict, and every one of the governors will dream of becoming emperor at last. It will be like the old days before the kingdom of Trantor, a dark age that will last for thousands of years." Baldy said, "Surely things won't be that bad. The Empire may break up, but it will heal itself quickly when people find out that the breakup just means war and impoverishment."
"Absolutely," said Hook-Nose. "We've got to remember that the Empire has faced crisis after crisis in its history and has pulled through time and time again."
But Red Cheeks shook his head.
This is not just another crisis. The empire has been deteriorating for generations. Since the fall of the junta and the rise of this new emperor, the empire has been so weak that the governors on the periphery don't have to do anything. It's going to fall of its own weight.
And the allegiance to the emperor, began Hooknose.
What allegiance, said Red Cheeks. We went for years without an emperor after Cleon was assassinated, and no one minded. And this new emperor is just a figurehead. There's nothing he can do. This isn't a crisis. This is the end. The other two, frowning, stared at Red Cheeks. Baldy said, You think that the imperial government will just sit there and let it all happen? Yes, like you two, they won't believe it's happening until it's too late. What would you want them to do if they did believe it? Asked Baldy. Red Cheeks stared into the galactograph. I don't know. Ever hear of someone named Harry Seldon? Wasn't he first minister under Cleon? Said Hooknose. Yes, said Red Cheeks. I heard him give a talk a few months back. It felt good to know I'm not the only one who believes the empire is falling apart. He said Seldon had heard enough. He limped toward the table where the three men sat and touched Red Cheeks on the shoulder. May I speak to you for a moment? Startled, Red Cheeks looked up. Hey, aren't you Professor Seldon? I always have been. Seldon handed the man a reference tile bearing his photograph. I would like to see you here in my library office at 4 p.m. day after tomorrow. Can you manage that? Well, I'm not sure, sir. Do it. And meanwhile, gentlemen, do you mind if I study the galaxy simulation for a moment? They nodded mutely. Seldon's finger reached out to the controls, and the red that had marked off the province of Anacreon vanished. The galaxy was unmarked, a glowing pinwheel of mist brightening into the spherical glow at the center, behind which was the galactic black hole. He pushed a contact, and a series of yellow dots appeared on the galactic image. They represented the habitable planets, 25 million of them. Seldon closed another contact. The yellow dots disappeared, but one tiny region glowed blue, Trontor, and the various worlds directly dependent on it. As usual, one had to be impressed by the smallness of the world of Trontor, a tiny place in the vast realm of the galaxy, but within it was squeezed the largest concentration of wealth, culture, and governmental authority that humanity had ever seen, and it was doomed to destruction. It was almost as though the men could read his mind. Baldy asked softly, Is the Empire really going to be destroyed? Seldon replied, softer still. It might. Anything might happen. He rose, smiled at the men, and left. But in his thoughts he screamed, It will! It will! Seldon sighed as he climbed into one of the skitters. There had been a time just a few years ago when he had gloried in walking briskly along the corridors of the library, telling himself that even though he was past 60, he could manage it. But now, at 70, his legs gave way all too quickly. The skitter stopped in front of the ornate doorway of the chief librarian's office, and Seldon stepped out. Last Zenow smiled as he greeted Seldon. "Welcome, my friend," he said in his high-pitched voice. "Greetings," said Seldon. Zenow rubbed his hands with glee. "I've got news for you, Harry. We've found it." "By it, lass, you mean—" "A suitable world." His smile broadened. "You just leave it to the library, Harry. We can find anything." "I have no doubt, lass. Tell me about this world." "Well, let me show you its location first." A section of the wall slid aside, the lights in the room dimmed, and the galaxy appeared in three-dimensional form, turning slowly. Again, red lines marked off the province of Anacreon, so that Seldon could almost swear that the episode with the three men had been a rehearsal for this. And then a brilliant blue dot appeared at the far end of the province. "There it is," said Zenow.
It's an ideal world. Sizable, well-watered, good oxygen atmosphere, vegetation, of course, a great deal of sea life. It's there just for the taking."
"Is it an unoccupied world, lass?"
"Absolutely unoccupied."
"But why? If it's so suitable, why wasn't it colonized?"
"Presumably because it was so far from everything. Too far, I suppose, for a prospective colonist. But I think not too far for you. You said the farther the better."
"Yes," Selden nodded. "I still say so. Does it have a name?"
"Terminus, an archaic word meaning the end of the line, which it would seem to be." Zenow rubbed his hands together. "What a glorious conception, setting up a huge project on a brand-new world, so that decade by decade a huge encyclopedia of human knowledge can be put together. Now that we've located this world, I imagine that your work on the preliminaries to the encyclopedia project will be redoubled. As you know, the library will be glad to help you in all respects."
"I'm aware of it, lass, and I am endlessly grateful. We will indeed keep working."
And as Selden left, he felt, as always, a pang of conscience over the deceit he was practicing. Lass Zenow did not have the slightest idea of Selden's true intentions. Harry Selden surveyed the comfortable suite that had been his personal office at the Galactic Library these past few years. How did he come to be here? For over 30 years, psychohistory had developed in a straight line, progress creepingly slow, but moving straight ahead. Then, 6 years ago, there had been a right-angle turn, totally unexpected. It was Wanda, of course, Selden's granddaughter. Harry closed his eyes and settled into his chair to review the events of 6 years before. 12-year-old Wanda was bereft. Her mother, Manella, had had another little girl, Bellis, and the new baby was a total preoccupation. Her father, Rach, having finished a book on his home sector of Dahl, found it to be a minor success and himself a minor celebrity. The net result, though, was that he was away from home a considerable amount of time, and when he wasn't, it was the baby he wanted to see. As for Doors was gone, and to Harry Selden that wound was ever fresh, ever painful. And he had reacted to it in an unfortunate manner. It had been Wanda's dream that had set in motion the current of events that had ended with the loss of Doors. Wanda had had nothing to do with it, and yet he found himself shrinking from her, so that he also failed her in the crisis brought about by the birth of the new baby.